Hey Internet, it's me. Now, first of all, if I'm wet, it's because I was just walking my dog, and no other reason, nothing weird. Anywho, it's been a minute since I've done one of just these game news roll-up things, so I'm gonna do that. Mostly because these are way easier to edit than reviews, because I don't need to get and parse through game footage. So, yeah. And the first thing I'll touch on is actually not quite a video game, but it's video game adjacent, and that's Dungeons & Dragons. Now, if you're one of the two people unfamiliar, recently, Dungeons & Dragons has been in the news a bit. But let me back up. A while back, in the early 2000s, Wizards of the Coast, the company who currently owns and distributes Dungeons & Dragons, they created what was called the OGL, or the Open Gaming License. Basically, this said that in perpetuity, going forward, anyone can produce their own content using Dungeons & Dragons as like a base for that content, and they're allowed to do so. So basically, if you have Dungeons & Dragons, you have the rulebook, you have the monster manual, all of that, and you like the base rules of the game, you like the stats and the mechanics and all of that, but you wanted to create your own module. So your own set of monsters that were unique to the thing that you created, some of your own weapons, maybe a dungeon layout or some NPCs that you had created, you were allowed to do that. And you could distribute that. You could, print your module and sell it, and it was fine. It was your content. Dungeons & Dragons did not have any claim to that. They would not stop you from doing that. Basically, they were the opposite of Nintendo. And now, to get into the legalese of this just a tiny bit, and you can watch like Legal Eagle or something if you want to learn a lot more, but basically, you can't copyright a rule system or a mechanic anyway, so even if Wizards of the Coast did try to go after people for producing their own D&D compatible content, they wouldn't have a legal leg to stand on because they don't own a copyright to pen and paper RPGs. Just a lot of the mechanics of like rolling dice to determine things and your base stats, like they don't own that, they can't own that, it's a non-copyrightable thing. But anyway, moving past that, that's what the OGL was. It said that people can do this going forward, forever, in perpetuity, have at it. It was a very community thing, and Gary Gygax, the creator of D&D, he wanted it that way. He wanted it to be a community-driven game, a communal kind of thing. He didn't want it to be just one company owning a thing. Basically, think of him as, the guy that died in Ready Player One. I forget the character's name at the moment, and it really doesn't matter. But yeah, that was his approach. And recently, Wizards of the Coast, or their parent company Hasbro, I don't know who, but it got out that they were working on a revised OGL, a OGL 1.1. And first off, since the original one said that it was active in perpetuity, I don't know if they could even really release a new one to override that, because that's what in perpetuity means. You can't override it. It's supposed to last forever. However, this new one basically was the opposite of the first one. It said that people do not have the rights to make content off D&D stuff, and if they did, D&D could claim ownership over that content if they so decided, and that if they were making money off of it, D&D was entitled to a cut up to, I believe it was 25%, which is a very significant cut. Basically, it undid everything that the OGL did, and people were upset. That's an understatement. People were incensed. People were furious. This goes against the entire spirit of the game. This breaks the rules that they set with the OGL. Like, this is just all the things awful. And some of you might be thinking, well, who cares if a bunch of nerds can't make their own nerd content? And yeah, that's fine, but you have to realize that like a Pathfinder, which is now basically an entirely separate game, that came from Dungeons & Dragons. That's where that started. Ruby, or RWBY, which is, a web series and an animated series and a podcast and now a video game, that all came from a bunch of people playing D&D. Harmon Quest, Dan Harmon's TV show, although he officially never says that they're playing D&D, they're playing D&D. So that show could potentially owe royalties to Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro, or just become content that they own. Like, this could affect a lot of things, and it was really a crappy move on their part. And everybody thought so. So much so, in fact, that Wizards, Hasbro, whatever, had to put out a statement and basically retract all of OGL 1.1 and say, hey, we suck. We know we suck. You've told us we suck. We heard you often and loudly. And we're going to undo all of the suck because we want to keep selling you products. So that was a thing that happened. Basically, all of this is to say, we bullied Wizards of the Coast into doing the right thing, so yay for the internet. Yeah, that really is kind of the takeaway there. I just wish we could have bullied Wizards sooner before they completely destroyed Magic the Gathering. But hey, one of the 2 games that they own is still running properly, so I guess that's a win. But moving on to things that are less crap and more awesome, some Kickstarter games. I always seem to mention at least 1 or 2 indie games that are up and coming and looking for funding or whatever, and this time's no exception. I want to promote a couple real quick. Obviously, as always, these are unofficial, unsponsored promotions. I'm not in any way related to these games. I'm not getting any money, blah, 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 all the things you have to say for YouTube. Anywho, games. The first is Sword of the Necromancer, and there's a subtitle of some sort. This is a sequel to the original Sword of the Necromancer, and basically, it's kind of the same mechanics as the first game, but they've added a lot more. So you still go into dungeons and kill monsters, and then try to recruit them to your side to help you fight other monsters. It's the whole thing. It's pretty fun. It's a roguelike, really good. It's enjoyable. I liked the first game. I backed it on Kickstarter, played it a bunch. It was great. Well, they're doing this new one, and it's still that content, but also they've added in an overworld where you can walk around, and now there's like a bit of like a city building kind of aspect to it as well. It still has all the dungeon delving roguelike elements. They've just added more on top of that. So it's more of what you liked in the first game, as well as extra stuff that you like from other games. So it's Sword of the Necromancer, but better. And the reason I bring it up is because it's still active on Kickstarter until the end of the month. I think the last day of the campaign is the 31st. So if you liked the first one, definitely back this new one. Or if you weren't aware of the first one, but you like roguelikes or city builders, this is both of those things. So definitely go check it out. It's a really good game. It's cool. And then on the topic of really cool games that are in Kickstarter, there's another one. It's Shira and the 40 Thieves? Am I mixing up with Alibaba? It's Shira and then a subtitle, and this is the definitive edition. It was an NES game that got kickstarted a while back, and it was really fun. It was a great game. It even made it onto the Evercade, I believe, in their Indie Heroes 2 collection. I just checked. That was a lie. It did not make it to the Evercade, but it should. But yes, it's Shira and the 40 Thieves. It's a fun game that came out for the NES, the NES. I'm sure there's a video of it on screen so you can see what it looks like in action. And basically they're releasing a definitive edition. So it's the same game, but plus. They've added like an overworld. They've made some other improvements that they just learned as they were going through and building the first game that they wish they could have done the first time around. Extra stuff that they realized they could have added in. Some graphical enhancements to some of the sprites and stuff like that. Like basically, this is for people that didn't buy the first game and want to play the full experience of the game. Or to people that did get the first one but just want a better version of it. And that is up on Kickstarter. It's got 21 days left. So check that out. It's a fun game. I don't want to dive too deep into it. I don't want to like try to oversell it. Because I know, even though the indie market is really high as far as like prices of games right now, I know some people are just burnt out on like the pixel graphic, whatever kind of stuff. So maybe this isn't for everyone, but I think it's super fun. I think if you like 8-bit games, this is a great one, and you should definitely get it. So, if my word means anything, there you go. Also, before I move on, I will say that I misspoke earlier, and Sword of the Necromancer does not end on the 31st. That's when the campaign starts. Right now, it's still in like the pre-campaign phase where you can go and like bookmark it, but it's not actually active yet. So you have a couple weeks to consider if you even want to think about getting the game, and then you can go and back it. So that's that. But then I will move on. The next one is good news or bad news, depending on who you are and what your thoughts on the subject are, and that's that the Google Stadia has officially died. It is no longer alive, the servers are down, it is dead, and I'm kind of the camp that this is a good thing. Multiple people have tried to do this digital-only streaming console, or just the download digital ROM to console thing, and yeah, I'm not a fan. Back when the Ouya did it, that was a big deal at the time, and I gave that one a shot because I was just interested to see how they would pull that off, and it was fun enough, but I like having physical games. And, now that console has gone offline and the servers are no longer there, I can't do much with it. I can no longer get updates, I can't download new games. If I, for whatever reason, lose my SD card or hard drive or whatever that I was using to install stuff onto, that content's gone. I can't even re-download what I had before because the servers are just completely offline. So essentially, that console's just a fancy brick now. And that's what all these new ones are too, especially with the Stadia. You didn't even install the games, you just streamed them. So it was always going to be a brick. No servers are going to last forever. No service is always going to be up. So you were never going to own anything. You were just renting games, basically. It was Blockbuster, the console. That's what it was. And that's just an awful idea to me. If you're paying this money, you should own something for it. You should have a game that you can hold in your hands. You should have something that at any point you can take and put in your console and play it. Because that's what you're paying for. That's what the games are supposed to be. This is a bad example because it's not an actual game, it's a distribution cart, but you get my point. At any point, if I take one of these games that I own and put them in my consoles, I can play them. It doesn't matter if the authentication servers are offline, or if the console does not have the most recent update, or if the game doesn't have the most recent update. They're playable media, and that's the point. That's why I buy them. And every time one of these digital-only consoles, like the Ouya, or the Stadia, or the PSP Go, or all these various other ones that have, tried and failed, I want them to keep failing. Every time these game companies and these hardware manufacturers try this, I want them to fail, because it just keeps reinforcing that they need to continue producing physical media, and they need to keep delivering an actual tangible product to gamers that are paying for these goods. So I think it's good news. I'm sure if you're one of the suckers that bought it, you think it's bad news, and I get where you're coming from, but I think as far as the game industry is concerned, this is a net win. But moving on to something that is directly video game, there have been some new expansions for cool games. I'm excited about that. Semi-recently at least, Planet Zoo got a new one. It brought in armadillos and caracals and some wildebeests and emus, and most importantly, butterfly gardens. You now have a big walkthrough exhibit with all kinds of butterflies in it, like 5 different breeds, and they all fly around and make little butterfly babies. And it's just a fun little thing. I thought that was nifty. Not much to say there, really. It's Planet Zoo. If you like having a zoo and playing with lots of cool little animals and building enclosures for them, you can do that, but with more animals now. So, yeah, it's nifty. I just thought it was worth mentioning because I love animals and video games, so, that meshes well for me. The other one worth mentioning is Vampire Survivors, which I tried doing a video on, and it wasn't coming out the way I wanted, but it's a great game. It's 1 part Gauntlet, 1 part Tower Defense. It's awesome. And then sprinkle on just a little bit of Castlevania, just for the theming and the sprites and stuff. Yeah, excellent game. I was a big fan. Steam recommended it to me for whatever reason, and I played it and I loved it, so good job Steam. It was a great game, super cheap too. It costs next to nothing to get, even when it's not on sale. I think it's under $10. But they just released DLC, which adds a new level and 13 new weapons, I think 6 new characters. It's it's significantly large for a DLC pack that costs $2. So yeah, if you haven't played the base game, definitely do. If you have played the base game, definitely get the DLC. I will say, if you're new to the game and you haven't played it yet, don't jump into the DLC right away. Play the base game first, because the DLC definitely feels like it's meant to be late stage. Some of the weapons, like if you're starting out, might seem a little OP, although if you're new to the game and want it to be easier, I guess do pick it up and just use the OP weapons and that'll be great. But it's meant to be like a late stage addition to the game. Unlike a lot of the other maps, which are very simplistic and open, this one is very complicated. There's actually like ledges and dead ends and just places to go that you have to access from certain ways, and it's just, there's a lot more challenge in this map than any of the earlier ones. Which again speaks to the quality of the DLC that this company put out. You know, for very little money, they put out what is the most complicated map in the game, a bunch of new weapons, a bunch of new characters. Significant programming went into it, I'm sure. So kudos to them. Also, while I'm on the topic of this game, I do love the people that made the game also wanted to do a mobile port, and they found, while they were reaching out in the industry to find someone to partner with, that they couldn't find a company that would develop the mobile version of the game without doing any of the predatory mobile game things that those companies do. You know, the microtransactions or the constant ads and just all the pay-to-win nonsense. And basically it got to the point where this developer said, you know what? We don't want to support those practices. We don't like that that's how mobile games are. So to hell with it, we're going to build the game ourselves. And also, it's just going to be free. And so that's what they did. They put out the mobile port on their own, and it's free for anyone. You can just go download it. You don't have to pay a thing. It's a free game now. They haven't ported the DLC over yet. They're still trying to figure out how to get that to work and what the pricing model should be. But the base game is on mobile for free. And yeah, it's a great game, a great developer. I'm happy to support them and plug their stuff. So go check it out for sure. But moving on to kind of DLC, but not really, more of just an announcement, and that's the Power Washing Simulator. If you're a fan of, you know, like a Jacksepticeye or Markiplier, you've already seen this game a whole bunch. Well, it's coming to consoles now, specifically the PS4 and PS5. And when it does, they're doing a free launch DLC tie-in thing where Lara Croft's mansion from the original Tomb Raider game will be available as a level in Power Washing Simulator. Personally, I think that's incredible. I think that is a really hilarious tie-in and a great way to sell the game on that console. I also want to go on the record as saying that if there's not a stain in the freezer from where the butler froze to death because everyone locked him in there, then they've completely failed, and I want no part in this. But if they do include that, then A+, 10 out of 10, would buy again. So yeah, if you want just very much a very casual game, I think Yahtzee from No Punctuation, or Zero Punctuation rather, refers to it as a dad game or a father game or something like that. But basically a game where you don't accomplish a whole lot of much and there's no real challenge, you're just doing things for catharsis. Power Washing Simulator seems to be one of the better ones. Definitely one of the more popular ones. So yeah, go check that out and you too can help Lara wash her mansion. But now on the opposite side of that, Ubisoft has actually announced that they are canceling a bunch of games. One of them was Project Q, which there's very little information about, and yet a bunch of people seem to have been excited and invested in this, because when they announced this, a bunch of people were upset. At least that's what all the headlines from various news articles would lead me to believe. I knew nothing about the game, so I don't really care one way or the other. And I don't think they even mentioned what those other two games might be. I think they're just unnamed games A and B. But yeah, Ubisoft canceled 3 of their upcoming games. I believe it's because they want to focus on their more core titles, which could be good or bad. I mean, Ubisoft is kind of creeping their way up there right alongside like Blizz Activision and EA as far as overall game quality. So they should refocus their efforts in making good games. But the problem is, a lot of that's not a lack of effort. You know, it's not that they haven't put in good development or made a good game. It's that they're predatory and shit. For example, Assassin's Creed. If you look at the first few, you know, they had a lot of really cool historical tie-ins. They had decent enough, somewhat compelling stories, really fun gameplay. They were great. And personally, I actually really enjoyed when they made the move to open world. Odyssey, I was a huge fan of. Part of that, of course, is the setting, because I'm an absolute sucker for Greek mythology. But part of it just felt like a really cool experience, moving around the world and, you know, just parkouring your way through everything. It was fun. I really enjoyed the game. I had a blast with it. However, it also introduced a lot of microtransactions and a lot of, you know, real money content that you could buy that essentially just gives you cosmetic makeovers. It's a very crappy model. They don't need that. Nobody wants that. Also, they pushed very hard for you to tie it into Uplay, because apparently buying the game and installing it on your console is not enough. You also have to validate to Ubisoft's personal servers for whatever reason, and that's really crap. No one ever wants that. Like, if I already bought the game and the console, and I put the game in the console, there should be no other blockers in my way. I should just be able to play the damn game. And then Valhalla was more of the same on that route, you know, more microtransactions, more Uplay connections, more just nonsense. So that was a big franchise that Ubisoft owns that they just kind of shit the bed with, and people are about sick of their crap. So to hear that they're canceling games to focus on their core games, that's all well and good, but this focus shouldn't mean more effort spent into developing predatory crap. It should mean rethinking your overall model and realizing why people are less excited for your games. It's not that the games themselves are bad, it's that your company is bad. You know, your business practices and your overall profit model is bad. You know, if you just make good games that people enjoy playing and want to play, you will make money. That's all you have to do as a game company, is make good games. Everything else doesn't matter. You know, if you don't have in-game currencies and real-world money to spend on cosmetics, if you don't have server connections, if you don't try to shoehorn some battle arena into your racing title, Forza, that's all fine. Just make a good game and people will throw money at you. Look at Minecraft. That was one game made by one guy, very basic concept, very low quality graphics, little to no story. There's no microtransactions or add-ons or any of that. It was just, here's a sandbox to play in with a bunch of squares. And the dude made a killing on it. Everyone loved it because it was just fun. You know, it didn't insult the gamers. It didn't try to take advantage of them. It just provided them a fun thing to do. That's all you have to do as a developer. Make a good game. People will throw money at you. But I will step off my soapbox and bring my TED Talk to an end and move on. And last thing I want to talk about is actually more DLC for a video game, but this is not DLC that is out yet. This is DLC that is coming soon. There's a game called Dead Cells, which is a Metroidvania. Slightly pixel-ish graphics, but not 8-bit. More of like a, how do I want to describe this? You know the, like, synthwave kind of aesthetic, or like the lo-fi girl, you know, GIF that I'm sure you've seen in a million different places, but on YouTube. It's that kind of pixel. So more of like a 16-bit, maybe 32-bit era kind of pixel graphics. That's what Dead Cells looks like. But anyway, it's a Metroidvania. It was a fun one. It sold really well. It got Game of the Year. It had, you know, some DLC and whatnot for it already. They just announced a new DLC pack. And this pack is Return to Castlevania. It is an actual partnership with Castlevania. For those of you that don't know, Castlevania is part of that Metroidvania genre. They helped create the whole thing, and this is official partnership with them. So you get to actually play through Dracula's castle. You get to use, you know, the holy water and the crosses and the vampire killer and all these weapons and accessories that you're used to. And I don't think they've mentioned the music, but I'm sure we'll get Bloody Tears in there somewhere. And I am super excited. I've always been a big Castlevania fan. You know, for me, that's one of my favorite franchises ever, right up there alongside Zelda. It's just absolutely great. I love the aesthetic, I love the music, the games themselves are super fun, aside from Judgment, of course. It's a great franchise. I'm very excited, and I think it's really cool that they're working with just other games to bring their content out and to just do this fun little tie-in. I think that's really cool, because we've seen a million Metroidvanias out there. You know, you have Bloodstained, which is made by one of the ex-developers of Castlevania. You had Unepic, which was basically a parody of at least some Metroidvania storylines. There's a million. I can't possibly name them all. Dust and Elysian Tale, one of the best games ever made. That's a Metroidvania. But there's so many of these, but none of them have ever been like officially sanctioned or tied into Castlevania. Castlevania has always been its one thing, and these other games are just in the style of, or in the same genre as. So to see Castlevania actually tying to this other game, that's really, really cool. It also means I absolutely have to buy a physical copy of Dead Cells now. I didn't own it yet, but I'm going to have to now, because it's got Castlevania in it, and I own all the other Castlevania games, so I need to buy this one too. Them's the rules. So, yeah, there we go. That's all I really had. There's not a lot as far as news in the game cycle right now. This is always kind of the downtime of the industry. You know, there's a lot of hype and a lot of big releases right before the holidays. And then you get like a month or two slump where people are just working on bigger projects for like a spring and summer release. So a lot of this was, you know, just some indie games, some DLC announcements, and Wizards being absolute cocks. But yeah, I just want to talk about some cool stuff that was happening in the industry, and also I just want to sit in front of the camera because I feel like I've made a crap ton of videos in these last few months and posted none of them because none of them came out right. And these news videos always work the way I want them to. So here we go. That's a video. I did good. I'm still working on a very big video that I'll post at some point. It's probably going to be like 2 hours long, and it's going to take me 3 days to friggin' edit. So that'll be out at some point, if you care. 2 people that are watching this. And yeah, that's it. I'm going to stop talking now. Bye!